You just fold it out and it covers so there. Hold it up there to 8 to 10 breaths.
That's the dream, right? Everyone here had a shot. It's kind of sour on the leg. What? You're presenting a track. I don't. You're like else. Why was just? Oh, no, I didn't read. Just like. Amazon. Sorry. I wanted to show Scott. Oh, I have no idea. But Scott was talking about these mechanisms. It's to help Scott earn or win up. So, you know. Yeah, the roll light.
Yeah, is it good?
All right, hello everybody. If you've never been here before, we do these monthly meetings. It's like a show and tell, share a project, talk about things. I think I'm the only thing to share tonight, which is bad because it just means I punted until just now to put together a presentation. So I'm going to share a bit about how the dust collector system works because we are working on building out the woodshop dust collector. And there we go. Got it. So those of you on Zoom should be able to see my screen. I'm gonna jump back and forth between some pictures and some videos on the interwebs on different websites. But Aaron, you wanna go? I can get you up here. Talk about your car repairs. So for those of you who haven't been here before, the wood shop, we have this big dust collector. This is called a downflow dust collector. It's made by a company called Torrit. And so I pulled up a image here, kind of what this thing looks like inside of it. Good music. So inside of this thing, there is a set of filters. So on ours, the filters you can't quite see, but they're going up to the right. And this thing's called a downflow system. And so the air comes in the top, tries to go through these filters, but gets slung kind of down towards the barrel on the bottom. And then the important feature is that it has built into it, these things on the right side are, they're like air compressor jets. So if we hit the button in there that Scott and I think Levi programmed that, what it does is it pulses air into the inside of the filters backwards and knocks all the debris off the outside of the filters. And so you're able to use the system and like load it up with debris. And then this thing shoots compressed air from the left through this cone, collects it, and then shoots it into the filter to knock all the debris off the outside of it. So long story short, when we look at this picture, you can get a better sense. So now this pipe coming in the top is the dirty or the dirt laden air coming in from the machines. It comes down, the filters are on the right half of this machine. And you'll see that these two little pipes coming out, the two little tubes are showing us differential pressure across the filter membrane. So it shows us how much crap is stuck on the filter as it loads up with dust. And that's on this gauge on the bottom. And then the air gets drawn through the filters and then gets blown back upwards. And this thing is up here, I added on, it's called a silencer box. It's like a $2,000 add-on from the company. It's essentially a box surrounded by foam that goes around the motor. And in this case, we're using this to then divert the air up and then to shoot the air outside. So that our air gets collected full of dust, settles the dust out into the barrel at the bottom, or it gets stuck in the filters, and then goes through the filter, sucked up into the fan, and then blown outside. And the idea there is that we're trying to gather all the dust so that we're not just shooting dust out in the air outside, making the environment worse, but also that we're not breathing the air inside again, so we're trying to push the air outside. All of this comes around because this guy, Bill Petz on the interwebs, has a whole huge website all dedicated to talking about dust collection systems and primarily cyclone systems. And we use a cyclone in another spot that I'll kind of show you. But this guy goes on and on and on and on. He's got a huge website all about air quality and indoor air quality and how woodworking and dust generation in general is not good for you. The reason I have this up is because there is a whole lot of complexity to getting these systems to work. And like building a dust collection system isn't just like throwing a giant pump in the way and hoping for the best. You do have to calculate the amount of air that gets drawn through the system. So like in here, they've got airflow requirements. So the machines need a certain amount of draw and the pump therefore needs to move a certain amount of air, and the pipes have to be sized correctly so that you can maintain the dust being suspended in the solution as it goes out. So long story short, fell on this crazy guy's website. The guy's got a little like crackpot theory that he's being pushed off all the internet forums and that everyone's after him for his fanciful cyclone separator design. I don't know how much is true there, but he seems pretty dedicated that the whole interwebs is against him. The secondary part of our dust collection system is these are just like furnace filter blowers with fans stuck in this, or filters stuck inside them. So these are located closer to the door, again, trying to keep the air that's filled with dust getting recycled and trapped in the wood shop and not going out with the rest of the shop. By throwing the air away outside through the big dust collector, we're also keeping that room negative. So anything that's out in this shop gets sucked into the wood shop and then gets thrown outside. So that we're constantly drawing air that away from people and then outside of the building. This is the dust collector in the welding shop, very similar setup, only this one's a factory configured with a silencer on the top. So the same deal, pipe comes in the top, goes down on the bottom, the filters are down here, gets drawn up, the fan's in the middle, and then it gets blown out the top and then gets pushed outside. So it's the same setup, a little bit different, also made by Turret. So this is a picture of the wood shop dust collection. This is a trunk line. So this is the coming out of that big brown thing. This is then running down the length of the wood shop. So the reason for this talk is that this past week I've been working on putting up the end of this trunk. So Spencer's been helping me to have the motivation to finish out part of the runs in here. And then the main thing is the magic here of these gates. So up here at the top, you'll see we've kind of got this 10-inch trunk running the length of the room. And then at each branch, we've got a controlled gate to shut off the branches. What you're trying to do is minimize the leakage, the lost air getting sucked into the system that's not coming from the machine you're trying to dust collect from. So you don't want to be dust collecting the room, you want to be dust collecting the machine that you're running. So you put gates in right off of the trunk, that way you can shut off the branches and not be sucking extra air off all the leaks that are down farther in the tubing line. The problem is they're way up on the ceiling, so there's no easy way to reach to them or get to them. And so they, of course, people make automated gates. So you can go on, actually pretty recently, these used to be a couple $100s a piece, closer to like this mark down here, this 250 bucks. They have some plastic gates, they're motorized, they're like 126 bucks a piece. So for each one of these things, we need a gate, except this is only a 4-inch gate. And we have a 10-inch gate. So we're running a 10-inch tube, so all these things need to be closer to the $4,000 mark as a 16-inch, or maybe only $1,500 or $1,900 we can get a 10-inch one. So now we're talking like $1,500 per machine to control the dust collection system, which is fairly ludicrous. So consequently, we of course are cheap and we're never going to pay that much, so we have to build our own system to make these things work. So this is the gate that's up on the ceiling. This is a gate in at. So it's just moving. Pass this guy around. I made one yesterday, a tiny one, not specifically to pass around the beauty, but it is handy size. So what we're doing then is we're running tubes up to the ceiling and automating the gate with the pneumatic cylinder. So this is just a regular off-the-shelf air cylinder. These are pretty inexpensive. They're like maybe $30 or $40 a piece. And then pull the plugs out of here. So inside of here, there's a piston and then this rod. So the rod's got a piston up here, and so when we push air in this way, it pushes the rod up. We push air in this way, it pushes the rod down, and that's all that it's doing. The bad thing about these is they're really easy to bend. So this huge one is pretty hard to bend, but that little tiny one, it'll bend the rod really readily. And so we have to make sure that our cylinder never sees any load. It has to be axial load only, so going straight in or straight out. We can't have any bending or moment or shear, otherwise you'll bend the rod, which is that's sad. So that's the gate side of it. Backing up a couple steps, they unfortunately don't sell ductwork with fancy branches already cut in, because that would be too easy. You can buy fittings, but again, that gets back to like each fitting is $100 to $150 for one T. And that's for little ones, not for gigantic ones. So in order to do this, I have some templates that I cut out. And how do you figure out templates? So if you're Jim, you'd sit down with OpenSCAD and you'd like design a bunch of stuff, figure out all the intersections. I'm too lazy, I don't know how to do all that. But there's some fancy software called Digital Pipe Fitter. Don't tell the Digital Pipe Fitter people, but if you don't want to pay $360 for Digital Pipe Fitter, you can go on and they have a trial. And for the trial, they'll let you generate any kind of intersection of any tube and branches and all sorts of stuff. But you can't output the CAD file. But you can output really big pictures of the intersections. So you just output the really big picture and then you lay your vectors on top of it, and then you can figure out your stuff. Ironically, I've used this software precisely twice because all of our ductwork is 10-inch, and so I either need a 10-inch takeoff or an 8-inch takeoff. There's really not too much going on there, so I didn't really want to spend that much money. Up in the ducts, when I pulled the trunk off to add in a new branch, we found out that we were accumulating a giant blob of plastic. So this is unusual, but the reason I have this video up here is to show you in the pipe, there's really not a lot going on. It's moving a lot of dust, but the dust isn't like floating in there. It's getting sucked through really quick. And for that to work out, we have to make sure that this pipe diameter isn't so big that the air is like slowly moving through it. But we don't want it so small that it's restricted and not able to draw. So we have to put in a big enough pipe that we've got enough volume to move enough air, but a small enough pipe that the velocity is really high so that the particles end up floating and then get entrained in the airstream and pulled away. Otherwise, all you do is suck the dust up in the pipe and it sits there. So in this case, this got us because we were running the pipe at a low volume because we have our motor variable speed control. So we're running a low volume and then pulling really heavy chunks of plastic into the pipe. And so the lesson learned is we just need to run it at full throttle whenever we're cutting plastic because the plastic tends to make heavy particulate. The good news is I took a stick and I poked at this and it sucked the entire thing in, so it didn't really make any difference. But so it's important to periodically check the pipe and make sure that things are not stuck. So for the back, these are the cylinders that we're using. They're just generic cylinders. Some regular dust gates. These gates are like $20 to $40 a piece. They're not super expensive to buy the gate. It's just a couple of cast pieces. And then we're adding on a bar of aluminum. And with the bar of aluminum, we can support our cylinder to keep it nice and rigid. And then we're bolting the bar of aluminum onto this aluminum frame. So as I pass this around, you guys can see, you can pull the tube, the cylinder is moving in and out, and the frame is staying stationary, and yank on the gate with it. So this other part of this then is way back here. On here, you'll see that we have this branch line coming down, and then it's a 6-inch tube coming down to the cyclone separator. And we use cyclone separators in pretty much all of our vacuum cleaners, and also in this case on the dust collection system after the planer. And the reason why that is if we look at the simulation, we can see what happens to the heavy particles. They spin around and then they get drawn or they fall down to the bottom of the tank. And they have two simulations here in a second, once this one ends, that show the light particulate. So this is, I think, a 2 micron. So it's 1 and 2 micron particles. So we're talking small particles come in and they're supposed to drop out, but they instead get entrained in the airstream and sucked out the top. These are heavier particles. These are 100 and 200 micron. So you can see the cyclone operates as intended, and the particles get slung to the bottom of the cyclone. So what ends up happening then is we try to minimize the amount of work that our vacuum system and our filters are doing by dropping all the particulate out before it gets drawn into the system where those filters have to manage all the stuff coming off. In this case, the planer shavings are really nasty. They're like corkscrews. So they embed into the filter media and then they stick. So when the pulse compressed air shoots backwards, it doesn't displace the corkscrews off the media, and then it just stays stuck. And it builds up this big bed of debris. So in this case, having fine particulate getting trapped in the filter is actually better than this corkscrew kind of stuff. So that's a thing that I didn't expect, but turned out to be a valuable thing.
Where was that pocket pull from?
That was up here right after the table saw.
So does it matter, like, if it's just like going straight into the tube, or if it's angled into the tube?
Yeah, so the angles, these are all 45-degree takeoffs that help with the flow. So you want to get the particles up and then get them to stay floating in the air.
Yeah, so that one is angled towards the blade.
It is, yeah. And that had made it through, but what happened is it settled out of the airstream once it got up in the bigger pipe. So in the 6-inch pipes, that thing got started off in a 4-inch pipe, got vacuumed out of the table saw, got brought up into the 6-inch pipe about right here, and then got drawn up into the trunk, and the trunk is then 10 inches. So it fell out of the trunk stream because the trunk airstream was high enough. And ironically, in this case, opening up the end of the pipe kind of fixes it anyways, because you get enough air volume going straight down the big pipe to suck it all the way out. So it worked out all right anyway. So long story short, why does it matter? Well, we don't want to breathe the nasty stuff that's coming out of the wood shop. This is a particulate sensor. It's actually out here in the shop. And I gave a talk quite a while ago about building these for use outdoors, but also you can use them indoors to see particle counts. Can anybody guess what this was?
COVID.
No, COVID's really small. What were we all doing on New Year's Eve? Close. It was like fireworks coming from the oven. Cooking pizzas.
Oh.
So cooking actually results in a ton of particulate relative to the background. And you'll see occasionally we have other high spikes. These are usually, honestly, it's sweeping the floor is a huge one because you displace all this dust and pick it up in the air. And then otherwise it's activity in the shop. So somebody might be out kicking something around in the wood shop or whatever. Yep.
But how granular is that? That's indicating that spike was like 10 PM.
This spike was, yeah, it's taking a sample every minute.
But I mean, I'm just assuming half of the graph between 12:31 and 2 would be first midnight, right? So what it? So
Yeah, that's not the time we made the pizzas.
Well, no, is it 7 PM? Could be great.
This is at like 8 something.
Right.
It's 1900, yeah, 7 something.
So,
Alright, that's
so
good.
that was
That's about right, yeah.
Yeah, it's right on. Brian, starts at 6:30, so just saying. But no, actually, you can always see anytime you cook in the kitchen, it's super evident on here. Even though that sensor's way over there by the front door, you can also see our filtration recovery time from the media that's in the furnace. So you'll see a spike, and then you can see this long decay, and you'll see a spike, and you'll see the long decay, and the decay curve is always consistent because that's the media, that's the MERV13 filter elements that are out in the air filter on the furnace. So these, and then this is PM10, I should explain this better. So this is 10 micron particulate. This is 2.5 micron particulate, which is the bad stuff for humans for the most part because it shoots through filtration. And then this is the PM1, which is really, really fine stuff that kind of floats around. This filter, or this detector doesn't have PM1, it's only got 2.5 and 10. 2.5 is the bad one because it gets stuck in your lungs, but it's large enough to carry, usually it's soot, and so it comes along with hydrocarbons from automobile emissions. So that's why we watch PM 2.5 because it's a particularly bad one for people.
So again, are you seeing the spike? Is it, how is that the spike related to slash the furnace? The furnace isn't kicking consistently on and off.
This is overnight. I got it running at 20% right now, and then it's also blending in outdoor air. So you'll see, sometimes you'll see outdoor infiltration. So I don't have the other, Brian's got a sensor at his house that's outside. And so you can actually compare the inside versus the outside. The inside air is 100% always cleaner, like way cleaner.
The inside
For here, yeah. Yep. Because I have good filters in the furnace. If we had crappy filters in the furnace, we're just pumping the same air all over again. So like the air quality this summer, when the air quality was like 300 outside, we could keep it at like 40 inside. But that is relative. You have to pay attention to the background, right? So this is 10 micrograms per meter cubed. And so this summer when we were talking like 100, that's 10 times, right? That's like way off the top of our chart. And then if we're talking 300, we're like into the next floor. It's crazy high. So that's the important thing to think about is like, yeah, these spikes are really visible, but in the scope of like pollution, these spikes aren't even on the register. Like 10 microgram per meter cube is really, really clean air if you were looking at outdoor air pollution. But as soon as you get indoor air pollution, then it starts to maybe matter.
The recoveries. Perfect.
Yeah, exactly. If you remove the source of the nuclear pizza, then it's fine.
You're just being.
Well, interestingly, smoking inside is a huge one. You can see the sustained and then the same thing, your recovery time for your filtration. Which is, and again, smoking is like ultra fine smoke. So it's harder for the filter media to capture it. But anyway, the eventuality is to take these sensors and put them throughout the building, so you can characterize if our dust collection in the wood shop isn't working. You can at least know, like, oh, you're dumping particles everywhere. Maybe. I mean, the other obvious indicator is just looking at surfaces. So humans are great at kicking dust all over the place for other reasons, but obviously we're generating lots of dust in the workshops, so it's just good to kind of keep track of what's going on. That's all that I have. Does anybody have questions, comments?
Is there a return, since you're sucking all this pressure out of the shop, you able to intake back somewhere?
That's a good question. So Matt's asking, if we're dumping all this air outside, where is the air coming from? And the answer is there is a makeup air port on the furnace that has an adjustable louver system, so we can configure the furnace to be more or less open. And then we just have air infiltration from leakage. So all the windows have leakage. You generally want to run your building as positive pressure. So what we would do is we'd have that furnace constantly drawing air in outside, and we would be pulling in that cold air or whatever, and we'd be pushing air into the building to then add pressure to the building to keep out the bad air that's outside. We don't do that because it would be really expensive, because you'd have to heat up. In the case of the winter time, you need to temper that air, bring it way up to temp. There are other systems like energy recovery ventilators that we can augment with to try to balance those things. I'm waiting for Sean to build out a ERV for us. You know, I got all the exchange media now. Exactly. But yeah, and then Joe asked in the chat, do we have a CO2 monitor? I have a box full of them, and they integrate into the furnace. So the furnace actually will do really smart things like monitor building CO2. And then if this building CO2 gets elevated, it'll automatically open those outdoor louvers, and it'll allow makeup air in, excess makeup air in, to dilute out the CO2. We can also, that's just called air quality in general. So we can also feed the furnace an air quality mechanic. We could say, oh, we can monitor these particulate sensors in the building, and we can push the furnace and say, hey, you know, our air is really shitty. Can you make us up some more air? And it can then do that for us and blend in more air coming in.
For the economizer, which is the louver system, talk about, it can even monitor humidity, external humidity, and factor and things like that in terms of how to make it.
And of course, the furnace company wants it's like $800 or $900 for the CO2 measurement. There's somebody on eBay who had them for like $16. And so he had 8 of them listed. They're all brand new kits and they actually match up with our furnace. And so I messaged him and said I wanted to buy all of them. And he was like, you know, these are $800 a piece. I'm like, yeah, and you want $16 for them and I have no use for them. So consequently, we have a bunch of them. But yeah, one indication for air quality, relative air quality, is just CO2. It just tells you how stale your air is inside relative to air volume. We have a big building and a lot of dilution. But
It tells you how different.
yeah.
But it seems to be heavier.
It's neutrally-ish.
Well, I guess I'm thinking right now.
Slightly, it is slightly heavier.
Well, my point is like this giant volume that we're in, other than like shops that are closed, all of our breaths right now is set with, but you know, it's just kind of versus once this building is built up or people want in a box. It would be really interesting to watch as people come into the congregation, you can watch and see if it's kind of smaller volume.
We do also have methane monitors, the but it's not tied into.
So a long time ago, I was at UW Swap, and they had a mining. It was like the mining audit tool for the state, some state inspector, and it was a O2 and methane monitor. And so I put the thing in the bathroom a long time ago, and somebody like, is there a camera in the bathroom? I'm like, no, that's the methane monitor if you look at it. But I always wanted to make the meter just slam back and forth periodically. The thing has not been touched in years. I have no idea how much battery corrosion there is inside or whatever else. But yeah, it was a good score. A few people have gotten my humor, but
With the backflush to the big building, which if that's all the finest particular backflush stuff, didn't make it through the filter, and it was too big, too small to drop into the cycle. So when you backflush it, are you just pumping into the air? Is it now like, is it congregated or solid in the way that makes it heavier and drops? Or why doesn't it just get sucked back over?
yeah. So the interesting thing, so Sean's question is basically, when I back purge the dust collector, why doesn't the dust just get stuck right back in the filter? And there's a few things to that. One is called caking. So caking is where you're literally building a cake on the surface of the filter. And that cake then accumulates and agglomerates all these small particles, turns them into cake, and the cake then collectively has more mass. So when you pop the filter backwards, that cake peels off. And so if you don't build sufficient cake and you try to clean, you do just kick all the dust back in the air. But fortunately, it just gets stuck back in the filter and waits to get caked again. So it's not too big a deal. But yeah, fundamentally, the heavy particles come in this pipe up top, and they come down, and there's 4 filters sitting perpendicular to the airstream. So the filters are longitudinally like this way. And so this air, the dirty air comes in, and those particles have a lot of mass of inertia. So they're flinging down. So that's why this is cleverly called a downflow system, because it's literally flinging the particles down. So the big heavy stuff goes straight into the barrel. But the lighter stuff can U-turn. So the filters have little block channels on top of them. So there's like a filter in here. It wasn't shown in that rendering, but there's a panel on top of here. So the heavy particles coming in either run into the panel and get diverted, and then they have to U-turn to get stuck to the filter. And so that tends to then flip all the heavy stuff out the bottom. And then the light stuff, yeah, cakes on the filter. We purge it, and the only time you purge it is when the filtration system's running. So this whole system's in vacuum. So this barrel's in vacuum matched by the cavity's vacuum, which is drawing off this long tube. So when you back purge, the system's still running. But if you think about it, the heavier cake now got displaced off the filter, and there isn't any air movement that's trying to draw back into the filter because it's kind of in air volume that's considered essentially the same pressure differential. So it tends to fall down rather than like get stuck back up there again. But again, if you purge constantly, you'd just be knocking the same light particles in circles. But fortunately, there's no real detriment to that. It doesn't really hurt performance.
Did you just know the purge itself?
Yeah, I read the manometer and hit the button periodically, and it makes a huge whoosh noise. So if anybody's inspired to play with the thing after this, A, the dust collector's got to be running, and B, if you touch it, it's got a delay. So Scott and his son Levi programmed it, and they implemented a 10-second delay. The 10 seconds is quite a while. So you like tap the button, and nothing appears to happen. And then right when you're about ready to like, oh, I don't think anything happened, it goes boom. Because it's dumping it's actually got an air accumulator at the back that's a pipe like this big that's filled with compressed air at 90 psi, and then it's got a really big like a solenoid diaphragm valve, and so it's able to flow like 1 inch worth of compressed air straight into the filter, so it moves a lot of air really fast. So that's the big
reason for the delay.
So
I'm just curious.
the initial delay, I don't know, I'd have to take a look at it. We didn't want somebody hammering it over and over and over again, because it's kind of sitting there on the run, not free. So there was some reason for a delay.
Wouldn't the delay make it more likely that the person would be like, oh, it didn't work, let me push it again?
The irony is the button gets stuck sometimes, so it like purges 4 times, and it purges another 4 times, and you're like,
Unless you sit there for
yeah.
30 seconds.
It's probably soft. Because there's four cylinders, or there's 4 filters, and so there's an inter filter purge delay.
It has to refill that compressed air reservoir.
After 1, 2.
Yeah, we might put that on proper. But
And then the one in the welding shop is actually a shaker system. So this is a different filter system. This has a motor on the top, and then the motor literally has a weight that just bangs on the top of the filter. And it just beats the shit out of the top of the filter. The filter is designed to do that, and then it knocks the dust off the side of it. So
definitely loud enough to be startled. One of the wood
they
chips.
both,
So-
yeah.
So it's kind of like that scene from Alfred's. Jack in the Box. A lot of them go.
I see, gotcha. Max on the start.
It's actually a random amount of delay.
It's how should be, yeah.
15.
Gotcha.
You know, they did that. You went, surprise them on.
So the other fun thing is on power restoration, it triggers the air filter cleaning. So if the building power dies, like the building power is out, whatever, something's going on, who knows what. Whenever the building power comes back on, you're like, oh, it's back on, and you hear this big boom. Well, this thing purchased.
I asked Alfred.
Thankfully, you put that right underneath the apartment.
Oh yeah, absolutely. A good back purge. But yeah, otherwise it's been working well. The only downside of these big dust collection systems is that the filters can be relatively expensive. So this guy here actually is a really common one. These filters are like $80 a piece, and they can be reused for a very long time. These are probably 5 or 6 years old. If you're willing to go through and periodically dust them off and clean them out. These ones here, the shaker filters are more complicated for no particular reason besides they have to be more durable. Those are like $150 to $300 a piece. And so ideally you want the backflow guy, not the shaker system. All these systems, Jim and I drove around and picked up from all over the place. You remember that? We took the little there was the Ranger, and we went from food service building to food service building. So there's a guy on Craigslist who had these, and I forget how much we paid. We paid a couple $100 for them. It was really cheap, but they were from the circus peanut factory. Literally, the factory machine that makes the stupid orange circus peanuts is what this one was. So every time I clean this thing out, you still get the faint circus peanut sugar smell. I swear to God, I can demo it. You can go in and stick your head in there. It still smells like circus peanuts. They're also completely filled with like fly larvae and all sorts of nasty stuff. So definitely keep that in mind. They don't clean every surface in the food processing plant, but they were using these to prevent sugar explosions because they got to keep down the sugar dust going, and probably minorly for worker health. I mean, just a small thing. But yeah, so we drove all over the place, pick these stuff. Mr. Matt?
You mentioned the big chunks getting stuck in the filters. I'm not familiar with this kind of engineering kind, but usually there's like a big coarse filter, then a finer filter, but isn't there like a quarter-inch screen or something?
So yeah, you want the filters to do the work because they're what's getting clean. But yeah, you could do pre-filters, and in fact, on some building systems, like the big fancy buildings, like over at UW, they'll have a system like this, and then they'll actually have an inline screen, like an inline filter, but it's only meant for like areas that are clean, and you're really doing like exhaust systems, not so much particle trapping. There's not really a good way to trap this stuff in a tiered way. That's why they just use these. And what it is the filters.
Paper towel that got sucked in there and just.
Well, the vortex separators you got would be good.
The cycle ones do really well. So these are the media. It is hard to tell from this picture, but these are like the densest vacuum filters imaginable. This thing is like this big around. They're huge. And they're like this long. And so the quantity of media in here is probably like acres in terms of media surface area. So they do a lot of trapping without really any detriment that way.
And there is a vent on the outside.
This is more to keep the media from getting ripped apart. So when cleaning if you aren't the person paying for these filters, you're usually a worker with like a baseball bat and you don't care. And your job is to clean the filter and get the machine back in service. So they literally just beat on them with a board, which is not good for the media, but is good for making them clean again.
But that's like the point, is like the pearls that are coming off the container are so big and they're like so randomly twisted, they're getting caught in that match.
And then this is the huge innovation from Turret that would sell you to or motivate you to throw away the old dust collector and buy a new one. They came up with triangular media because it's like 5% better at not getting trapped by all this big stuff because it teardrops the particulate off. So they have the cartridges are oriented, so it's the same thing that the particles are tending to teardrop off the surface and roll off the media rather than getting trapped. So they went from a cylindrical system to a teardrop shaped system. They have made no improvements in the past 15 years otherwise. So, and these air filtration systems, I think Shira sent me a quote. She's out in Massachusetts. She got a quote for like $20,000 for the dust collection, just like the system, not even the piping, not anything else, just the big vacuum unit. So these things can get insanely expensive when you're buying a qualified system from the OEM for a specific purpose. Yeah, they definitely suck. We are just using whatever we got laying around, and they have varying sizes, like this little teeny one up to gigantic ones, up to like, they sell like 64 quantity units. Like they get really, really, really huge. You'll see these on the side of factories and stuff. If you're like me, and you go look at factories to see what they got going on, but they get really big and then they can chain them together. So you can have huge filtration systems. Any other questions?
So sometimes put on the outside.
They're mostly put on the outside. I put it inside here to specifically not annoy our neighbors. But these are 99% of the time outdoors. They don't have them inside usually. So the machine is designed to go outside, which I'm sure helps tourists sell more when they rust out and have to buy in and sell you another one.
Definitely appreciate the focus on healthiness, the air quality. I mean, if you read some of that guy's, stuff,
Screed.
there's real science behind it. I mean, when I was a kid, we treated, sawdust as health, basically, but it really is dangerous. You need to be mindful of it.
Yeah, there's as Sean probably knows, there's varying levels of terribleness for woods, and a lot of it is like tropical hardwoods. Some of it too become what's called a sensitizer. So it's not that it bothers you the first time, but once your body has accumulated like annoyance with this thing, you can't be around it at all. So there's certain species of wood that become really, really, really big problems. Of course, it's all the really cool looking wood because it's all the stuff that's like loaded with oils. So a lot of the tropical woods are not good for you.
Cedar.
Sure.
Stuff too, my brother, owns the one top shop, all the grain dust. Permanently allergic to all kinds of things because I think that's.
But that's,
So this is the guy with all the conspiracy theories against him?
Well, this guy, I mean, so this guy's been doing this stuff for 20 some years. And if you look at like the FAQs, that's where he kind of goes off the rails and stuff. Like, he's got, yeah. So he's got this idea that his cyclone designs are being stolen and that people are trying to keep him off of forums by him teaching people that wood dust is bad. Because the conspiracy side of it is that the manufacturers of all these dust collection systems, they don't really work. Like the dust collectors that have like a bag filter, there's nowhere near enough filter media. Like we talked about, the downflow system's got this massive can and a huge thing, and even that's barely enough to do anything. So somebody selling you a single layer bag filter, that bag filter can't trap those. And so the quoted efficiency on the bag filter is when it's completely full and no air is flowing through it anymore. So at that point, you can claim, oh yeah, it traps 90% dust, which is accurate when it's full and there's no airflow. But when it's clean, it flows a ton of air, and then it has like 10% trapping efficiency. So as your system fills up, the trapping efficiency gains to the point where there's no more volume flow, which is the problem. So to this guy's point, there's a lot of people who sell these things to you and claim efficiencies, and they do claim it overtly if you read it. But most people don't read it and say, oh, it's only 95% efficient when it's loaded, which is spelled out in there. But admittedly, it did not used to be spelled out. It used to just say, oh, yeah, it's a 95% efficient filter. You should buy this and put it on your table saw and you'll be good. The other biggest thing is if you think about it, our cyclone system is settling large particles, our cyclones do. Then it goes into the downflow system, which flings large particles out the bottom. Then it traps smaller particles on the filters. But then what goes through the filters is by definition ultra fine. It's super small because it made its way through all these different systems, which is why we're then throwing it outside. So if you just return it to the room, which is what every single dust collector ever does normally.
Just run it to throw it outside.
Well, you can actually, wood shops just run the dust right outside. They don't do anything. They just have a blower fan and all the dust goes through the blower fan and gets shot out back and makes a huge
I
pile.
remember our high school shop, just every time the vacuums were on, you see all this dust.
Yep.
Gathering outside.
Okay, so the peanut, the circus peanut factory was using this like to prevent spontaneous combustion. Why are we not at a risk? Why doesn't that happen in this risk like this? You're really give a giant volume of dust and you have potential sparks, metallic things, either nailed. What's in this whole cycle?
Yeah, so they certainly can blow up. So Sean's question is, why aren't we worried about our cyclone exploding? And the answer is, we should certainly think about our cyclone exploding. The biggest thing is if you look at this, even when you have a pile, like an unlimited volume of sawdust to draw from, you can see the airstream, although it has particles flying in it, is relatively unsaturated. You've got to hit an ignition point where you've got to hold a spark, and then you get enough fuel and enough oxidizer. So you get the perfect blend of spark, fuel, and oxidizer, you can explode. Anything short of that, though, and nothing happens. So if you're lacking the spark, most importantly, nothing happens. But you still need to have enough, dust that's floating in this air column and that's not being settled. And so that's where you want an efficient system that's pulling the air out and drawing away the particles and settling them or dispersing them or getting them out of there. What you don't want to do is have a whole bunch of slowly moving column of ultrafine dust. So where you typically have problems is like time savers. There's a reason I don't have a time saver here. And one of the big reasons I don't have a time saver is a giant belt sander. The issue with the giant belt sander is it makes a shitload of dust. It's literally just sanding away all the wood. So if you look at our planer shavings, they're these big curls of wood. Those don't tend to have enough reaction area and they can't get distributed enough in air volume to blow up. But ultrafine dust does, and that's a bigger issue. But yeah, our system is comparatively tiny, like overall, even though it's a big vacuum, we have very small pipe area. And so it's less of a risk there again, because we're not using a ton of machines at the same time. None of our machines are really making this ultrafine dust, and our ability to draw that dust quickly is very high because there's such a big motor sucking up the thing. So
Does the risk increase? So if back for example, if you fill up the trash can, it's not your.
no, because it's not distributed again. So the massive like compacted dust isn't burnable either because it's got too much, doesn't have enough oxygen availability. So you've got to hit this magic moment where you've got enough dust and train distributed in the air, enough oxygen then available, and then you've got to spark it off. But as soon as you settle it into the can now is just like a solid hunk of wood. And so if you try taking a lighter to a log, it won't light. Everybody knows from their childhood trying to start fires to make their parents happy. So you need to make kindling, make small dust to get that to burn, to then get hot enough to burn the bigger stuff. So it's the same thing here where you've got to have this blend of things. But yeah, as the dust collection systems get bigger, there's regulation on. They have to have a spark trap. So there's an arrestor system and a bypass system that they have an infrared camera watching the dust stream. And if they see a spark, it flips this trap over and it diverts the dust stream into the outside or into the air or whatever, away from the dust collection system. And so they just use an IR camera to look for a hot IR flash. And they do this so knowing the air velocity, and they do so upstream far enough to trigger the gate to close in time to divert the spark. It's like if you drive by Madison College, they have a really big dust collector outside, and they have the big, I think it's a big yellow or it's red is usually the colors they're painted, but it's like this weird big triangular thing in the pipe. That's the diverter valve. And so that's what triggers the kick over to knock the spark out of the system. To get a spark traveling that far in the system, though, you've got to have that spark not have touched the walls. Because if it touches the walls, it'll quench it and cool it down. Because the walls are metal, so they suck away all the heat. The second one is it needs to be in the airstream and not have burned out. So it needs to have enough available fuel to continue to burn. So it's not just the spark, it's the spark and the fuel to continue to get it to burn. So it's not to minimize that risk because it's a real thing, but it's just to say it's got to have a whole bunch of things to have happen. So when you hear like
Not have nails, we work.
nails are bad. Yeah, rats are bad too. But one of the biggest ones is just that all the conditions have to be right. So when you hear like the flower plant explodes, it's usually because they had no dust collection. And on top of the no dust collection, they allowed a lot of dust to accumulate. So you get dust up in the rafters and dust everywhere. And as all of you know, I yell at everybody for getting dust all over the place because the whole idea is to try to minimize the dust that's all over them.
I had a friend that worked in the bakery, and she came to work one day, and they shut down the bakery for the day because either late that morning, or early that morning, late that night, they had a giant cylinder silo of flour up front, and they blew the top, and they had shear holes that basically they somehow got sparked in there. And I only remember this because we spent like 3 weeks shifting all the flour bread because they found like 6 of the 20 bolts. So there was still flour in the bin.
Usable.
Usable, you're right. I mean, it was like the fire went up and not even right. So they were literally sifting the flour until they made out that batch of flour. The tank was outside the pumped it into the bakery or something. But so it was pretty fascinating. But yeah, they like basically like they heard this explosion, they went out in the parking lot, they had to like sitting in the parking lot.
Yeah, they have explosion relief panels for dust collection systems to pull the system off.
Yeah. Well, that was my next question. So before I have
It's not quite big enough. Yeah, it needs to be the next size up, and then you have to have relief panels and all sorts of stuff.
It does have a 10 second delay, so you have time to get out.
Kind of think about having pushed the button. Anybody got any other things they wanted to share? No, I don't know of anybody else who's got anything to present, so I just want to make sure we aren't missing anybody. Otherwise, we're gonna abandon the folks on the Zooms. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thanks, Chris.
Oh yeah.
That's